Hi, it's me again. Time for another Walking Dead blog, and this one is for the episode that was on Sunday called Heads Up. Now we all know that Glenn is alive, and we know how he escaped all those walkers is by he rolled himself under the dumpster, the under the dumpster trick, which is kind of lame, but that's the writers. But eventually, I thought it was I thought it was pretty stupid, but I don't know how long Glenn will last for in the sixth season, in season six. So, and eventually, as soon as the walkers started walking away, Glenn got out of the dumpster, and Enid said heads up and threw him threw water, threw a bottle of water at him. But eventually, Glenn goes to find Enid, but she would not answer any questions or do anything. So of knowing Enid being the spoiled brat being the brat that she is. So yeah, I'm sure like I love the how they interacted and Enid pulling the gun on Glenn and eventually Enid finally giving in to Glenn's demands and eventually he wanted to go home, wanted to be with Maggie and their unborn baby and but eventually they're walking to get home. Eventually, when he's around the when he in the alley, he saw the David that who was killed in Thank You became zombified, and so but he eventually kills him, kills the walker, and eventually Glenn and Enid went along their days talking about how Enid came to Alexandria on her own as an orphan, living with Olivia, and eventually, I don't know how the relationship turned out, but eventually, there was a green balloon on on the tree, so there's a signal that Glenn and them are safe. But eventually, Glenn suggests that the helium tank was in the bushes somewhere. So and they say in a lot of balloons, the more string, the more weight. So eventually, that's what Enid was doing, was just blowing up balloons and her and Glenn talking. And eventually, as soon as Enid and Glenn went back to Alexandria, they saw that the area was full of walkers. And he was just like, oh my God. Oh, but now it's gonna get real. Okay, let's go back. Speaking in Alexandria, Maggie is still concerned about Glenn not being safe, and eventually she was talking to Rick of how she saw Judith earlier, and saying she looks a lot like Lori, and I'm just like, but I saw her like they keep changing Judith, the twins, like they keep because Judith was born in season three, and still she's still not even walking or talking yet. So, but eventually, I don't know the time frame in The Walking Dead is, but I'm sure down the road Judith will be get a little age towards Judith down the road, and but eventually Meg, yeah, she is still on the lookout for Glenn, saying she's just so worried about him. Now, eventually, we go to Morgan. Rick Morgan was just doing his Vena stick, and eventually, and Rick said, "We need to talk," and he said, "Okay." And eventually, Morgan went to the jail to see if the lone wolf was standing there, was still there. But eventually, he came out and saw Denise, who was making oatmeal, and eventually he said, "How do you get that cut on?" Talk about cut on his arm, but eventually he didn't want to get it checked out. He didn't want to talk about it, but eventually Rick said it's time to talk. So Rick went with Morgan. Morgan went with Rick, and then there was Rick, Carol, and Michonne. Carol, they were confronting him about how he let all the other wolves go, and eventually attacked Rick in the RV. And he said he kept saying all life is precious, it is wrong to kill, and then Michonne says that isn't what the world is anymore. And eventually Carol says, is it true that you let them go? Like Carol saw Morgan letting the wolves go, and eventually Rick says, "Do you think you're gonna try to get through this without getting blood on your hands?" And but Morgan said, "I don't know." And then all of a sudden, Morgan saw Denise again, and eventually he talked to her about not knowing she saved Scott's life, and eventually he gave her he gave Denise a test saying about a cut, and he said, and then she got it right for swelling. He covered up one word and it said swelling, and he said, and he confessed that the wound is not on my arm. And then she said, and then Morgan and Denise went to possibly the prison to check in on the wolf that survived. Eventually, Carol was babysitting Judith, and she had Judith in her arms, like she's so good with her. And eventually, she saw Morgan and Denise going to the prison, and then she to the house prison, and eventually she saw them, and eventually she went to took Judith over to Jesse, who would watch her. And then eventually Sam saw Carol, and eventually Sam went, "Is my dad one of those monsters?" And he says, "How? I don't want to become one of them." He says, "You have to kill." And she said, "You have to kill to survive in this world." But Sam seemed really, really scared, so scared the moment that the bad wolves were in the house, and he's just a frightened boy, and we don't know how long he's gonna last in the show because there's so many characters they want to get to each character at a time, so that means a lot of them don't have much screen time at all. But eventually, Carol decided as soon as she dropped off Judith with Jesse, eventually she tried to go. She went to the house, and then she sees Morgan open the door, and then she was very pissed off, and she says, "What the hell do you have in there?" But eventually, next week, it's gonna blow over, man, because Morgan and Carol they clash, their personalities clash, and I know Morgan saved Daryl and Aaron from the horde attack in the Delano Foods trap that the wolf set back in Concord. And then now eventually let's go to Rick. Rick in the episode, he decided to build up the wall again and to make it safer because the tower that got hit by the truck is starting to decay, like it's going crumbling and crumbling and crumbling. And eventually Tobin came, stepped up, helped out, and as soon as they were helping out, Morgan came over, and then you see somebody on the tightrope trying to get over, trying to escape, trying to help out the walker, and trying to help out the people that are still out there, taking the herd out. But eventually, and with Spencer, like he was just all on the ropes, and then Tara and Michonne were on the other end, and Eugene talking and all that on the other end. But eventually, they tell him, "Spencer, come back! Spencer, come back!" Eventually, the rope he had with a pitchfork, like holding it just slipped right off, and he just swung like Tarzan, like into the walkers, and I'm just like, "Oh no, no, no! Are you crazy?" I was just frightened. I was flipping out. I was going crazy. But uh, eventually Rick, Morgan, and Tobin, Rick said to Tara, and he said, you gotta save them. These people say you gotta save this guy." And he says, and so she got her gun, grabbed her gun, and she's like shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting all the walkers while Rick, Morgan, and Tobin were saving Spencer's life. But eventually, when Carl got attacked by the walkers, eventually the walker didn't bit him, but they got his shoe in the episode after in season 4. Now they had Spencer's shoe, which is really a coincidence. I don't know, but we'll see. Eventually, and then Rick looked at Tara and he says, you nearly died for them. She says, what? Like I can't hear you. He says, what the hell is wrong with you? And Tara, being the badass she is, gave Rick one of these. I was just like, yeah. I was just laughing my ass off at that part. But eventually, Deanna praised Rick for saving Spencer's life and all that. And okay, and then you see Rosita in one part, in Eugene, they were teaching, like, and Jessie was in that scene, she was teaching the good people how to use a machete. But eventually Eugene was, like, zoned out, and then all of a sudden, Rosita nearly, like, thought she was gonna cut Eugene in half, and I'm just like, ooh, with the machete, says, what are you doing? Like, and she says, Eugene says, still scared, like, still a bit of a scary cat. And he says, I'm afraid to die. And he says, dying is always an optional thing. And people were, like, wearing open toe shoes. And I'm just like, are you crazy? But eventually Eugene was too undecided, so he left the group after the machete class. But eventually there's this scene with Rick, Ron, and Carl. Eventually, Ron wanted Rick to teach him how to shoot, point the target. But eventually, he had they taught him how to use a gun. He says, if you cannot be stiff, you cannot be still, or you're dead, or you'll get bit. So eventually, he gave him a brief gun target practice. But eventually, he gave him the gun, but eventually when back in the pantry where Olivia is, and eventually Ron was sneaking around, dropped the food on the pantry, out of the pantry, and she said, and he went and stole some bullets for the gun, and eventually, when the, and then eventually when the balloons started, going up, the green balloons, they saw them, like there was, Rick saw the balloons, Maggie saw the balloons, and Carl was just walking. Tara was looking for Denise, and eventually they were walking, and eventually, unknowingly to Carl, Ron was behind Carl with a gun and his gun in the back. I was afraid he's gonna shoot Carl, but eventually Ron went and go. But eventually took the gun out. I thought, oh no, not another Rick. When he was thinking about taking last season, forget when he was about to take the gun out, wanting to shoot Porch 16. But eventually he had that chance to conquer. And eventually all the balloons were on the, and Meggie was leaving and saying, Glenn is safe, Glenn is alive. But eventually, but then in the ending, all the hell is gonna break loose. The tower came crumbling down. It fell over. It went all over. The wall broke. And then all of a sudden you see all these walkers coming into Alexandria. And I'm like, oh, it's going down now. But eventually, I just hope Daryl, Sasha, and Abraham make it back in time to take out the herd. So I guess that is my opinion. That is my thoughts on the episode Heads Up. And eventually, I forgot to say at the beginning again. If you haven't seen this episode yet, don't don't press play. Watch the episode first before you come to my blog. And remember, if you have any questions or comments about this episode, please feel to leave a comment in my channel. But eventually, rules are no trolling, no bashing, no rude comments, and absolutely no disrespect for the show or the characters or the actors who play them. But next week's episode will be the mid-season finale. We finally reached 8 episodes. I went back quick just a month ago. We saw the season premiere. But now next week's episode will be titled Start to Finish. But eventually, it's the mid-season finale. So after Sunday's episode, we won't be seeing The Walking Dead until Valentine's Day. But I'm planning to do once a week some some polls, some top tens, and favorite moments of all time while we hype up for season 60 of The Walking Dead. And we hope and pray that Sasha, Daryl, and Abraham make it back in time to lay out to save the rest of Alexandria. So anyway, that's it for me, and I will see you next week as we talk about the season 6 mid-season finale, start to finish. So I'm heading, so checking out now, and I will talk to you again next week. Night.